Welcome to the BankTalk podcast, the show where we talk to leaders and experts from the community banking sector. Whether you are a current CEO or aspire to be one, this podcast will give you valuable insights and advice on how to run your financial institution better. Each episode explores a new topic with a guest who brings their unique experience and knowledge. Tune in and discover something new each time you listen.
Hello and welcome to BankTalk. I'm Sean Cunningham, Sales Executive with Remedy Consulting. On today's episode, we'll be joined by Justin Dunmeyer, who is the SVP of Innovation and Product Strategy with ICBA. Today's topic is going to center around exactly that, why continuous innovation is a requirement for community banks. Hope you learned something new. Justin, thanks for joining us. Welcome to BankTalk.
Well, thank you so much, Sean. I'm excited to be here.
I introduced the audience to kind of your role and who you're with, but why don't you just kind of fill everybody, all the listeners in, just a little bit about your background, a little about ICBA and kind of how those things came together.
Yeah, Sean. Well, again, thanks for having me here. It's a privilege to be here. My name's Justin Dunmeyer. I'm the SVP of Innovation and Product Strategy here at ICBA. For those that aren't familiar with ICBA, ICBA is the Independent Community Bankers of America. And we really have a very clear mission to create and promote an environment where community banks flourish. We power the potential of the nation's community banks through advocacy, education, and innovation. So in my role here at ICBA, I have the privilege of working with a wonderful team in the innovation pillar, and we do a lot of different things. So we do quite a bit of innovation programming, both for our member banks and the broader community bank ecosystem. And then notably, we run a nationally recognized accelerator program called the ThinkTech Accelerator. And in this program, we bring cohorts of 6 bank technology companies through a very rigorous 10-week program during which they'd talk to several hundred bankers as part of the process. And this program allows those early and growth stage fintech companies to really more deeply understand the community banking space, what the real needs and challenges are there. And then on the other side, there's tremendous benefit for our member banks that participate because they get kind of early access to and early looks at some of the up and coming fintechs and bank technology companies that are serving the community bank space. Prior to joining ICBA, I spent a little over a decade in community banks, with most of my time focused on digital strategy, fintech partnerships, data analytics, and some other more broad innovation type work.
Good deal. Well, that sounds like a really cool job getting to hear all the new things that are coming into our space, especially as it's focused to the community financial industry. So let's dive into that a little bit. As you think about today's environment, what about it requires continuous innovation from every financial services provider? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Sean, that's a great question. I think that the biggest driving force here is really what consumer behavior and business behavior is telling us. And I think if I was to roll this up, there's a saying that our chief innovation officer has said, and I really align to, and that's banking is no longer a place you go, it's a thing you do, right? And I think it's important. We have seen over the past 10, 15 years, let's say, a dramatic transition from in-person type transactions and relationships onto digital platforms, right? Online and mobile banking and similar. And based on the most recent FDIC study, we found that over 70% of consumers are treating an offsite channel as their primary banking channel. So again, things like online and mobile banking. There's a small percentage that use telephone banking, but that's the minority. And because of that, we have to continue to reimagine how we deliver what we know as banking, whether that's payments, whether that's depository, whether it's lending, or any of the other wonderful things we do here in this industry. And so because of those changes to what consumers and businesses really demand, right, we're really in a spot where there isn't much of a choice. We need to be innovative, right? We need to continue to meet our current customer demands as well as prospective customer demands. At the same time, too, we have seen really a deconstruction of the banking relationship. So if you go back in time 15, 20 years and you ask someone, well, who do you bank with? The answer would be pretty clear, right? They'd say a bank name or maybe even a individual banker's name. And generally, they'd have a lot of their financial life with that one institution. In today's day and age, we all know that it's fragmented. Consumers have 20, 30, 40 different financial relationships with each kind of function or feature being its own thing. You think about some of the fintechs that are out there that are laser focused on money movement or P2P payments or even credit score monitoring or investing. All of these things are starting to encroach into the core business of the community bank. And while we saw that happen first with consumers, we're also seeing that same transition happening with businesses. An average business has well over 10 different financial relationships, right? You think about AP management, AR management, payroll, expense reports and expense management, lending. All these things have been fragmented to some degree. And so I think both the changing consumer behavior, the evolving competitive landscape, all of that points to a real need to be innovative as a community bank.
That really makes a lot of sense, and it's just a reminder to me how old I'm getting, I guess, being in the industry for 3 decades and how much things have changed as you were going through all those things. So, let's dive into more of the specifics of it as far as what banks can really do about it. So, as you think about the next year and a half or so the rest of '26 and throughout really all of '27, what are kind of the top 3 use cases for innovation? In other words, if banks only have a limited pool of money to spend, where should they, as far as innovation goes, where should banks really think about spending that pool of money?
Yeah, Sean, that's a great question that you ask, and something that I think most community banks are asking themselves. We all recognize we have maybe limited technology budgets, or certainly we have constraints on how much we can spend, both from a money perspective, right? As well as time, right? Let's face it, any type of new project will require staff time and work and whatnot. And so before I dive into the really the three specific areas, I do want to recognize too that it's hard to speak for the entire industry, right? Each bank is going to have their unique strengths and weaknesses, unique kind of go-to-market strategies or different verticals or markets they're serving. And so while there's some commonality that I think works well for many community banks, it would be a mistake to say this is the only way. So what we'll talk about here, I think, are just some things that have risen to the top as I've talked with banks, but certainly it's not a one size fits all. I also think that it's important to really spend a moment to define, well, what is innovation? Think that candidly, innovation can sound like a buzzword. I've been guilty of this. I've heard the word innovation and been like, well, what does that actually mean? And so I would like to frame really the rest of our conversation with a consistent definition of innovation for the community bank space. And how I like to define innovation is it's a repeatable discipline of identifying better ways to serve your customers, operate your bank, and stay competitive using new ideas, technologies, or processes. And there's a couple things I want to highlight here. Number one, new ideas, new processes. There are a lot of innovative things you can do for really zero net new spend. So, not all of innovation is about going out and finding some new technology partner. Certainly, there is a time and a place for that, and technology can be a great enabler for innovation. But I do want to kind of dispel the myth that innovation equals technology spend, because the reality is those things can happen independently. And also, it's important to recognize that I like to think about innovation as happening on a continuum, right? So on one side of the continuum, you have what I would call incremental improvements, right? Those are the things that you do day in and day out. Maybe that's updating a parameter in a banking system, or maybe that's making a slight tweak to how you onboard a customer, right? Things that are just kind of day-to-day business decisions that each decision makes you just a little bit better. And those stack up over time, right? I think we've all heard the saying about being 1% better each day. That leads to really significant improvements. So we have incremental improvements on one side of the continuum, but then over on the other side of the continuum, we have what I would call new approaches, right? And that's maybe some of the more novel ways of innovating, right? So thinking about things like spinning up a digital brand or in participating in embedded banking or some of the more, I don't want to say out there, but some of the more bleeding edge types of ways of delivering banking services and products. I did just want to frame that up, but I will dive into really some use cases that I've seen be impactful for community banks. And so, really, I want to talk about three categories, and that's going to be AI, data, and customer experience. So, I think those three in particular have really an outsized opportunity for innovation to drive ROI and impact. And we'll break down each one of those and talk a little bit about each. So AI, right? I think can't believe we made it, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes into this, and this is the first time I'm saying the words AI. But certainly, no surprise to any listener today, AI is completely revolutionizing and changing how folks bank, as well as almost every other function in their life. And I will share candidly, in the early days of AI, or the most recent AI craze, if you will, I was a little pessimistic, or I was a little bit in a wait and see approach. Certainly, there is some element of hype around AI. But I tell you what, over the past year or so, as I've had the opportunity to work with both banks as well as fintech founders and others in the ecosystem, I mean, I am bought in that this whole AI thing, yeah, this is real. This is going to be, in my personal opinion, right? This is Justin speaking. I believe that this will be bigger than the internet, bigger than the industrial revolution. This is changing so much about how we live our lives and how we interact with financial services. There was an interesting, just to go on a little sidebar here, there was an interesting study released by Plaid very recently, again, looking at consumer behavior that found that 55% of people are asking AI financial questions, questions about their financial lives. And what's interesting is that stat about a year ago was closer to 5%, right? So we've seen this rapid adoption. Consumers, businesses, they're treating AI agents and AI in general as really a trusted companion, I would say. And you're seeing things rolling out in some of the big LLM providers that echo this, right? I know a couple months ago we saw a press release from OpenAI around allowing the linking of financial accounts into their environment. Similar press release from Perplexity recently as well. And so we're seeing this way. So, okay, so what does that mean for a community bank? Well, I think what it means is if you're not doing anything with AI right now, now's as good as a time as ever to start, right? And you don't have to go from 0 to 100 on this overnight, right? This AI is one of those wonderful technologies that you can really kind of crawl, walk, run with. So if you're not doing anything today, I would really encourage you to start somewhere, right? Use Copilot, use ChatGPT, use whatever reasonable tool you have access to, and start with those low risk, high reward type functions, right? So use it to help create some marketing content, right? Use it to help you improve like operational efficiency, right? Maybe explain a process and look for ways to improve that. You can start without exposing PII or taking on excessive risk. You can start with some very real world use cases just to get started, start gaining an understanding. Now, for some of your listeners, maybe they are already well down this journey. I've had the privilege of speaking with banks that, I mean, they're light years ahead, right? They're using agentic AI to do QA and do other types of functions within their bank. And so certainly there's opportunity for any bank, I would say, on this AI continuum. I think the most important thing is to get started and get started with something reasonable. I will briefly mention, ICBA, this has been a kind of a resounding thing that we have heard, right, from the banks we're interacting with is, hey, we need more time and resources to implement AI. I will call out that we do have a community bank AI security readiness guide available. That's available on our website. Certainly a good resource if you're a bank that's starting to think about how to use AI. Okay, so that's the first, right? We talked AI.
Yeah,
Let's talk
data
about
was next. Is that right?
yeah, data is next. Let's talk about data. This one is near and dear to my heart. Kind of as I grew up in the community banking industry, I spent a lot of time really playing with the data, understanding data at a very deep level. I have a deep respect for this. And I think the important thing to note about data is that when you take something like transactional data or user data from your online banking system or things like that, that is your customers telling you what they want, right? Like we talk about listening to our customers a lot. And data is one way to listen to your customers. Now it's not the full picture, but it's a pretty significant picture when you really start unpacking it. And so I think that as we look into the future and how we deliver relationships in banking, what are the important elements, right? We know that folks are shifting to the digital channel and we want to extend the relationship to that digital channel. So, how do we do that? Well, we need data to do that effectively. We need data to understand how our customers are using our products, what competitive products they're using, right? Maybe where we have gaps in our product offering. We need data to understand where the customers are having good experiences and maybe challenges. Think about failed sign-in reports to online banking or failed transactions, or those types of things that are just little friction points that over time can cause customer churn. And quite honestly, we need good, well-structured data to fuel kind of the next leg of growth. As we look at the implementation of AI, you know, AI basically eats data. That's the fuel for AI, is it needs data to learn and improve and make recommendations. And so I would say, where can you have the most kind of outsized impact on innovation is anything focusing on understanding your data, understand how your customers behave, understand where they're spending their money, where they're having incoming money, right? Both on the retail and business side. There is gold in the data, but I also recognize it's a challenge, right? Some of the existing systems that are common in the community banking space don't always make it easy to extract that data. So spend some time really ensuring that you have someone on the team or in your institution that can understand the data and present it in a compelling way. And AI can help you there. These all kind of fit together, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about data. I got into banking almost 3 decades ago, and I was I had this idea that banks had all this data because at that point in my life, I'd applied for a couple of loans, and it seemed like you needed to give them your firstborn. Then I get there and I'm like, "Hey, can you give me all this information about who our customers are?" And they couldn't get me anything. And we've definitely changed as an industry over the last several years, but there still is that challenge with linking all these systems together.
Yeah, you're spot on, Sean. And I think this is a little cheesy, but I've said this a few times that data is one of the largest assets a bank may have. Right? It doesn't show up on the balance sheet. I recognize that, but it's a tremendous tool, and it's how your customers are telling you what's important to them. So let's
What was
talk
the third?
customer experience. I think that's another kind of key area that I would focus innovation efforts on. So I feel community banks have long been like a key member of their communities. I think as an industry, we have really demonstrated the ability to manage relationships, grow relationships, and have real meaningful impact on our communities, the businesses and individuals that we serve. Community banks are excellent at that. But where people choose to bank, as we talked about, I think I referenced the FDIC study about over 70% of folks are using offsite channels. Where those relationships happen have been shifting. More of that is happening in kind of an autonomous digital layer, if you will. And it's really more important than ever to ensure that your digital experiences are clean, easy to use, and really support that relationship that the banks have worked so hard to develop. And so I'd say if you're focusing on innovation, anything that can drive improvements to customer experience is super important. And if you need to whittle that down even further, I would say really your digital banking channels, your online and mobile banking, maybe a separate treasury system if you have something like that. For many customers, those are the bank. When they think of XYZ bank, they're thinking of, well, what's the experience like in the app or in online banking? And there's a lot to do there. This doesn't mean you have to go and implement some new online banking system. No, I mean, you can do a lot of great work with the existing system you have. You may be able to add in third parties or additional partners to help extend what you offer and change how that looks. So again, breaking it down, focus on AI, focus on data, focus on customer experience. I'd say there's two other categories that I'd at least like to touch on. The other two would be payments and fraud. And we won't dive too deep on those, but payments and fraud both I'd say are areas that are ripe for innovation. Obviously, fraud never sleeps and payments keeps changing. We have so many new rails and different ways of interacting. So spend some time on those as well.
Gotcha. So as you think of those, obviously banks are going to have to choose and credit unions are going to have to choose what's most important to them and their organization. Is there one that you're really pulling for that you think is a quick win for the best chance to get their investment back out of it quickly? Anyone that's the kind of the leader in the clubhouse in your mind?
If there was one thing to do that would be like the best return on your investment for something that's quote unquote easy to do, I would say just start with evaluating your existing systems, right? And this could be, again, choose the systems you use, probably your core, probably your digital banking provider, your LOS system. There's kind of a handful of different systems to look at. And just be sure you truly understand what it is you have, what optionality you have. Unfortunately, as new technology rolls out into an organization, sometimes there's a lot of activity in the early days, right? You implement a new system, you have a good understanding of it. But as time goes on, I've seen it happen where ownership of that experience or that product kind of wanes a little bit. And this is just a friendly reminder that all these systems are highly configurable and likely are supported by vendors that would be more than happy to walk you through how to optimize or change some tweak some settings, change some parameters. So I think that's one of the things that can have an outsized ROI simply because usually it doesn't even involve net new spend. You go in, you make some updates, you listen to client feedback, challenges, and you make necessary changes. Does that answer your question, Sean?
That does. And it kind of as a tag along to that, as you think of this, as a bank chooses to do one of those things, any advice for them as far as how to think about getting to, say, a 3-year ROI or to be diligent about that process to kind of track your results? Anything you can offer there?
Yeah, ROI. What a good topic. So I will touch on that. I do want to share a fun stat about ROI on technology spend in particular. So this is a common question, right? We talk a lot about measuring ROI, and certainly you should be thinking about ROI as you invest time, money, resources into either innovation or technology projects. I will call out in a recent bank director study, they found only 18% of banks said that yes to the question, does your bank measure return on investment for its technology project? So I think as an industry, we we aren't universally really measuring ROI. And I think that that really aligns to why this question is meaningful, Sean. I mean, it's hard. Some of the technology spend is just a little more opaque or vague than other types of spending. And so I think what's important when you're considering a 3-year ROI is deciding in the beginning of the project or the implementation how you're going to calculate ROI. There is not one formula for this. So if you were, let's say, and I'm just going to make up an example here. If you were implementing a new commercial loan origination system, right? Maybe you're a bank that's moving from Word and Excel and email, and you're going to move to a LOS system. Well, spend some time early in that project really thinking about, well, what is ROI here? Maybe it's that I close deals faster, or maybe it's that each loan officer can carry a larger portfolio because they're supported by technology. Or maybe it's that we make decisions quicker. What's once took 3 to 5 days now takes 3 to 5 minutes. Some of these are going to be so dependent on what the bank is trying to improve or change that it's hard to really say a one size fits all approach there. Sean, is that going to answer the question on ROI? It's hard. I wish I had just an easy, like take X times Y and there's your ROI. But unfortunately, that just doesn't exist today.
Yeah, and I think it's more important just to think about those things as you're trying to decide what you're doing at an organization. When you have a process in place to hold yourself accountable, it's just an important thing to think about as you're considering these projects. I guess to spend this a little bit different way, because ROI a lot of times is about the expense of this or what the income side is of these things. So you talked about 4 or 5 different topics from an innovation standpoint, but are there any of those that come to mind where maybe the customers could help pay the bill in a sense, if you will? Like, you think about this, banks can charge $25 for a wire transaction, but they can't get away with charging $1 for a Zelle transaction because Venmo doesn't charge at all. So is there any strategies or any thing that you'd think that could really, a bank or a financial institution could offset the cost of any of these things?
We'll be right back.
Ever feel like your tech budget's running the show instead of supporting it? You're not alone. Between bloated vendor contracts and outdated systems, a lot of banks are stuck paying more for less. And here's the kicker. Those big tech vendors, their contracts are built to protect them, not you. So if you're hesitating to make bold moves because of tech costs, it's time to flip the script. That's where Remedy Consulting comes in. We help banks take back control, cutting through the fine print, optimizing spend, and finding tech solutions that actually fuel growth. And we're offering a free review of your tech stack, spending, and vendor contracts. No pressure, no sales pitch, just expert insight to help you make smarter decisions. Even if we're not the right fit, you'll walk away with clarity and confidence. So go to remedyconsult.net or call 206-295-5776. Let's make your tech work for you, not against you. Thanks for listening to the BankTalk podcast.
Yeah, and those are great examples. I mean, I think, Sean, as you alluded to, yes, certainly folks are still charging for wire transactions, but yeah, charging for a Zelle transaction today seems very not sustainable, right? Because of the competitive pressures from the Venmos and Cash Apps and similar. And I think collectively, as you look at just the non-interest income category as a whole, we have seen some erosion there, or some, I shouldn't say erosion, I should say change. We used to see that most checking accounts had a monthly service fee. Well, I think anybody today could go open a free checking account at a plethora of banks, right? Same with these transaction costs that you alluded to or spoke to, Sean. So I do think what is changing, though, and where banks can charge effectively, is that what the research is showing is that customers are willing to pay for experience. And okay, so let's break that down. What does that actually mean? Well, think about mortgage lending today. It's very reasonable to assume that some of the very large mortgage players are getting a lot of volume. And we all know the mortgage business today is maybe not what it was several years ago, but I think the point still stands. So they're getting a lot of volume, and they're probably not even the most competitively priced. They're not necessarily winning on rate and fee. What they are winning on is ease. If I can get my mortgage by doing a 5-minute form on my phone, taking a picture or two of my W-2 or whatnot, and I'm kept informed. It's an easy process. I'm confident it's being handled. I, as a consumer, I'm willing to pay for that ease of use. And you also have started seeing other ways of charging for transactions that are a little maybe non-traditional. So as we go back to maybe the wire or the Zelle transaction, yes, I think in today's day and age, it's very hard to say we're going to charge you $1 for a Zelle transaction. But what you have seen some of the neobanks and fintechs and other apps out there start doing is maybe you don't charge for the base transaction, but you charge for the real-time transaction, right? You give your customer some level of optionality, right? So maybe an ACH is free, but if you want it real time or Fed now, maybe that's 1% or a 0.5% or whatever is digestible. So I think in a whole, a few things. One, there are new ways to charge for reasonable services. And there is, I think, a growing body of evidence that consumers are willing to pay for experience. Now, it gets a little fuzzy if you ask consumers if they're willing to pay for experience. They won't always answer yes, but the actions sometimes are a little different than verbal responses or direct responses. Here, I think we also need to think about how we build kind of the profitability model for a relationship. So maybe we used to rely on $1 per Zelle transaction, but if we can deliver a fantastic experience and we can retain a depository relationship for a much longer time because the relationship's easy, because the technology is good, well, certainly maybe we can offset some of those non-interest income fees that we were previously relying on just by extending the relationship, capturing more of the relationship, and really just by being a great partner to our clients.
What's the old saying? Don't trip over dollars to pick up dimes. That's kind of what you said there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So moving a little bit differently on this, can you think of any examples of how a particular bank that you might be familiar with kind of transformed their culture as a result of innovation?
Yeah, I have some examples there, but I want to kind of flip this one on its head a little bit. So I think there's more examples of banks that have committed themselves to building a culture of innovation and thus have led to better results. So I think that there is a very important cultural element to this. Innovation is not it doesn't happen on its own, right? You can foster this inside your organization. And how do you do those things? Well, there's lots of ways, but certainly leaning into curiosity, right? And having avenues for curious employees and team members to just get curious, right? Let them try new things. Let them fail fast. Let them explore maybe different ways of doing things, those types of things. There's all sorts of other research out there too on innovative cultures. I don't know if we have time today to talk to all of those, but I say that because I think once you have the cultural element handled, which candidly is the hardest part. I mean, changing culture is much harder than implementing technology. Once you have that settled, a lot of the technology or transformation kind of happens on its own when you have a team that's curious, that's engaged, that's committed to modernization. Now, if we're going to break this down into a specific example, because I do want to provide you one, I'll talk about a $500 million bank that I know that really leaned into AI as things were coming out, and actually leaned into specifically the Gemini and kind of Google environment, if you will. And because they were willing to be innovative and kind of try new things, right? They had a few really positive results. One is they used some AI prompts and tools they created to really rethink about how they were training both one-time training and ongoing training their internal staff. They gamified it, they made it a lot more relevant to each individual person, and that solved a few problems for them. Number one, again, their employees liked it because it wasn't quite as, I don't want to say the word boring, but it was just a little more interactive and personalized. But also, what came out of this is they were very quickly able to pinpoint some areas where staff maybe had needed more additional content or more help or more training. And it also, by implementing like an AI driven kind of training platform that they developed themselves, it also has helped them identify potential challenges really before they happen. So again, really drilling in to understand like where do we need to focus training and educational efforts. One other example that is a little more of an edge case, but is very fascinating, and I think is maybe a little peek at what we'll see more of in the future, is I had the opportunity to talk with about a $4 billion bank or so over the past several months. And I was actually on a call with this bank looking at a fintech solution. And we do about a 30-minute demo, and we're kind of debriefing at the end and talking. And the banker I was talking with said, "Well, hey, can I show you something real quick?" I said, "Okay, yeah, sure." Shared their screen. And in that 30 minutes where we had been talking with the fintech, little did I know this banker was essentially vibe coding the solution we were presented. And so that really stood out to me. I mean, it was one of the first times I've seen in the community banking space somebody actually vibe coding. We hear talk about it a lot, but actually doing it very quickly.
Interesting.
And it really started to highlight like a different way of thinking. As in the community banking space, when we look at technology, implementing new technology, purchasing new technology, generally there's like three ways to do it. You can build, buy, or partner. And the build option has generally been out of reach for many community banks. There's not on staff developers, like they're just not set up for that. With today's capabilities, like that is starting to change. And now I am not here at all to say that, yep, just go out and vibe code something and deploy it. I think vibe coding is a great way to ideate, to maybe come up with MVPs or prototypes, but you still need to do all the other hard parts about software development, right? The QA, the testing, all those things. So I just want to be very clear. This is not me saying vibe code everything, but it is interesting that we're starting to see maybe some more optionality to be a little different in how you innovate, allowing you to build internally.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, what did we miss as you think about this thing? We've touched on so many different things today, but as you think of this topic and kind of your world, what did we miss and didn't get a chance to talk about today?
Well, a couple things. I mean, I think if I was to leave the audience with just a two to three like actionable, what should I be thinking about with innovation? I would want to leave them with these. Number one, it's super important to define what innovation means for your bank. If you as a banker don't know quite what innovation means, take some time to decide that and memorialize it. Maybe it does mean buying new technology, but maybe it means just improving what we have or some combination thereof. And then once you have a definition, like think about ways to support a culture of innovation inside your organization. Again, we've touched on this a little bit, but some ideas there definitely like get curious. Ask other banks and bankers what they're doing. Talk to your customers, right? Have focus groups or product advisory groups, or call them whatever you will. Just have it a way to talk with your customers. A second thing I'd say is as you go down this innovation journey, start with the easy wins. I mean, there are likely things inside of every business, every community bank where something that takes 30 minutes or an hour to change may have very outsized positive impact. So starting with those easy wins kind of allows you to start the engine and start crawling, walking, running if you're just getting started. And then the last kind of takeaway, this is a little out there, but it's super important. And that is secret shop. And when I say secret shopping, I'm not talking about I guess maybe what many of us are familiar with, right? Send somebody into the branch to secret shop the branch staff. Certainly that may still be relevant. But I'm talking about secret shop the fintech ecosystem and the neobank ecosystem. Go open accounts at some of these big names that you hear out there in radio ads and TV ads and ads everywhere. It's important to do that because that will really communicate to you what is the competitive landscape like. Like the reality is I can go and I can open an account somewhere else in 2 minutes or less, and I can be set up and running. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that any point of friction, a customer can choose to leave. It just takes 2 or 3 minutes. And so just being familiar with what exists out there is so important. During my time as a leading digital strategy for a bank, that was one of my secret weapons, right? I would be constantly opening new accounts, trying to just understand what's out there, what are some of the more bleeding edge ways that the folks are delivering the customer experience. And then I'd like to, Sean, just kind of leave with this. Community banks are in a wonderful position right now. My thoughts are that the future really belongs to institutions that can most effectively combine trust, relationships, and technology. Community banks have just for hundreds of years have excelled at that relationships and trust. We're decent at technology, but technology is a part of those three ingredients, right? And so I would argue that community banks of all the players out there compared to big banks and neobanks and credit unions, I would argue that community banks are actually the most well positioned for really the future of banking.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I love what you said there about mystery shopping. A lot of times the interactions you get are very similar, but you pick up some really interesting things sometimes that can touch how you run your business. That was very good. Well, Justin, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks for everyone for listening to Bank Talk. Keep listening, keep learning, and have a great day.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for listening to the Bank Talk podcast brought to you by Remedy Consulting. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and share our work with others. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.